No. Everybody's just coming awake here. No questions online or here?
About anything?
Yeah. Before we start.
Oh, just, I wanted to make sure we can hear you.
No. I just love the taste of St. John's wort tea.
Are we going to cover herbs for a sore throat?
We will eventually do the throat. We can probably throw that in today.
It's John Heppel is wondering.
Okay, well, since there's no questions, let's do this. Let's get pumped up here. I feel sleepy, so I gotta get pumped up too. Cheers. Do St. John's wort recording.
Mhm. You are good to go. Is that a different? Okay, you're like looking on that.
So today we're gonna talk about St. John's wort, which is really like a whole class in itself, pretty much. So for real. I'll pass this tea around so everybody can see this tea. So this is from, oh yeah, this is mountain roasted. It looks really herby and not flowery, so I don't think we got this from Shea. It's quite a bit of stems and stuff, but it's still good quality. So there's a lot of things that are related to St. John's wort, but this particular species, Hypericum perforatum, is the species that we want. We have a bunch of different ones on the prairie. And in China, I think there's some different species, but this is like the official one. Obviously, Hypericum relates to the sun, right? Perforatum refers to the fact that the flower petals, you can always tell if it's real St. John's wort, because when you hold the flower petal up the light, you'll see these little blood red dots inside of the flowers. That's the perforatum. So that, and this is a weed in Nebraska. It's considered a noxious weed in most of the world because if cattle eat it, they can get sensitized to the sun. They can get sick from it. So years ago, there were all these warning labels and books by people that didn't know anything that said, be careful with St. John's wort because it could make you photosensitized, and that's only true if you're a cow. It does not affect humans.
You need to be
at all.
Okay. Wow.
But we have learned that we'll see topically St. John's wort is awesome for sunburns and radiation burns and these types of things. But we do not put it on right before we go out in the sun. This would be after. Because potentially it could topically like make your skin more photosensitive when it's on. So it's odd in that we use it for sunburn, but it could potentially topically make your sun more reactive. There's a couple case studies around the nation of people having like St. John's wort oil on their skin when they had like a ultrasound for like physical therapy or something on a muscle. And it also potentially can activate. So we don't have this on like before we do radiation treatment, like for cancer, or before we do like a ultrasound or something like that. But afterwards, we do this as soon as we get home from the radiation treatment. Okay. We'll talk about that. So this is St. John's wort is really like a first aid cabinet in itself, right? Chemistry of St. John's wort is super complex. Like the chemistry of all plants. Is this a closed book discussion? It's not. The chemistry of St. John's wort is ever evolving and ever understanding. Nobody still really totally understands how it works. Should that dissuade us from using plants just because we don't understand like their complete chemical nature and the activity of every compound? It should not, because when we look in the PDR for drugs, many drugs have an unknown mechanism of how they work. Like Adderall for ADD and Ritalin, if you look, they're stimulants, but if you look under the method of action, it will say unknown. A lot of antidepressants, it's just assumed that they work through different serotonin receptors, but if you look in the fine print, it'll actually say unknown. A lot of drugs actually have an unknown mechanism that they work through. So the chemistry of St. John's wort is a very complex plant. In the old days, when I was younger, labels used to say standardized for hypericum. Now they say standardized for hypericin and hyperiforin. So what we know now is basically there are hundreds of compounds in St. John's wort, and they all interact to give it some of its wound healing and antidepressant effects. Like a lot of plants, it's also going to have a lot of what we call flavonoids. These are these antioxidant, anti-inflammatory type compounds. So this is where a lot of St. John's wort wound healing kind of properties come from. But we think a lot of the antidepressant compounds come from these hypericin and hyperiforin, but we don't know. It's very interactive. So, and we know like with every plant, there's a synergy. So all of these kind of intermix in this milieu to create the effects of St. John's wort. So, okay, the tea is making hot. Okay. There's a couple of tricks with St. John's wort though that we need to think about. Number one is it's best used as a fresh plant tincture or a fresh plant capsule, which would be almost impossible to do. Except for Gaia Herb makes a liquid cap that is their tincture that's had the alcohol kind of spun off. So we do have access to a fresh plant capsule from Gaia Herbs. Otherwise, they're all going to be just concentrations all over the place. So every company is going to have a different concentration of St. John's wort, a different method of extraction. It's really confusing. We've talked about adulteration in the marketplace, which in the herbal medicine world is a huge issue, right? So a lot of companies will called spiking, where they take this compound hypericum and they make it synthetically in a lab because it's really cheap. And then they just add it to a powder of some crappy herb, basically. It could be whatever is cheapest, like whatever, whatever tree bark is like $1 a pound or something. And then when you do lab testing, this is kind of what they screen for. So it looks promising. So you have to be really careful with St. John's wort. But it works best as a fresh plant. So if people have tried St. John's wort, you always have to question them about how they tried it, because you haven't really tried it till you did like the fresh plant tincture. Do you want to get a fresh plant tincture? See how red it is? Or this, right? A good fresh plant tincture should be pretty red, and the oil should be pretty red too. From these hypericin compounds are actually reddish. The tea we're drinking has a reddish hue, but it's not, I wouldn't call this red, right? This is brownish red. But if we drank just the flowers only, it would be a lot more red. Okay. St. John's wort has a long history of use. One of the oldest used medicinals, kind of right up there with fennel and that, and used a lot. So there's a lot of folk wisdom and cultural practices for when we harvest this plant to have special healing properties. When do anybody know what day we harvest this plant ideally? The name gives you a hint. What's that? Couldn't harvest on Sunday because that's the day of the sun, right? So this is a St. John's wort is about the most classic example of a solar plant that we have. It is considered a plant of the sun. That's why it's been used for depression for such a long period of time. Being a plant of the sun often imparts like light or solar protective properties. So this is also why it's been used historically for evil spirits and cleansing and purifying things spiritually. St. John's wort is still in the Catholic Church anointing oil. Actually, it's one of the ingredients in there. We know because people have tested it. So you can see, you can't really see from this distance, but see it's like burgundy, bloodish red. So this would be a decent, a good quality. It can get even redder. It looks more red in my hand, but I'll pass this around if anybody wants to try a few drops.
So anointing oil, is that like for baptism, or is that thing that they like?
Yeah, it's
do with
used for
the-
baptism and also for like blessing. Or I don't know that it's used in like exorcism rites, but I assume it probably is. I don't know that exactly. So its energy is obviously warm, but it's not superheating. And even though its energy is warm, it's such a strong nervine and mood uplifting property. It doesn't, the warmth of it really never aggravates people. So you don't have to worry about the warm nature of it. So when we harvest it, if we can harvest just the tops where the flowers are at, we just kind of shave off the top 6 to 12 inches. We don't want to use a lot of the stems and leaves, because the plant's about waist high, probably about waist high usually. We just want to shave off the top part. That's the super medicinal part. So a lot of companies go through a lot of effort to get fresh St. John's wort and tincture it right away fresh within the first day of being harvested. Okay, but the day we harvest this would be, there's two, the ancient day we harvest this would be the summer solstice, Midsummer's Eve, right? And we talked about in class, I think, if you actually go out in the nature of your garden and take some St. John's wort flowers and put under your pillow on the eve of the solstice, you will often have a visionary experience. I've even tricked people with this, like giving it to people who had no idea what I was doing. I said, try this, put this under your bed. They had no interest in natural medicine whatsoever. And often they would have like a really wild dream at the very least. But a lot of people feel they even have like a prophetic dream or like a very deeply insightful dream. A lot of stories about this say that If you put this under your pillow on the eve of summer, you'll be blessed for the whole year spiritually. So it's a really cool thing to do. It's also traditionally even just hung, like hung from the rafters in the old days to keep negativity away. Almost like how we would smudge in modern times, they would often just hang the plant. Or sacred places would have like St. John's wort sprinkled on it to like make the area clear or sanctified or blessed. You know, so much so that it's still in the Catholic Church anointing oil. So a lot of that history has been maintained. A couple weird things about this plant. I mean, obviously its energy is what direction since it's solar. Very uplifting plant, probably one of the more uplifting plants that we have. So it's warm, it's uplifting, it's really solar. It's just like such a powerful plant. Just a good plant to always turn to when you need help. Remember how we said when you feel lost, depressed, overwhelmed, can't find your direction, everything feels doom and gloom, right? This is a plant we would always turn to. So it's going to be really our main, probably the most preeminent, definitely the most researched, but also a very historical plant for depression. All types of depression. Doesn't matter what kind of depression it is, or what caused it, what emotional trauma or genetics, or just situational, right? This is good for every type of depression known, and it's also good for seasonal affective depression. So funny TikTok today, also called farmer's depression. I like that term, that's fine. So we use it a lot for any kind of seasonal gloominess, seasonal grouchiness, like it's the perfect herb for right now. When we're all like done with winter and like, oh, please come here. So, very, very soon. It is good for mild to moderate depression. Just FYI, nothing's been shown to be good for severe depression, drug or otherwise. There was like this headline article years ago, and like all over the news. It was a great example of how the pharmaceutical industry spins stuff. It was this about probably 5-6 years ago. Big study showed St. John's wort. The headline was St. John's wort does not work for severe depression. And the study like actually compared St. John's wort to other prescription medications for mild, moderate, and severe depression. And guess what? No medication or drug worked for severe depression. And in fact, St. John's wort was still more statistically effective for severe depression than the medication. But the headline was that it's not effective for severe depression. So very deceptive. So St. John's wort can take for depression a couple of weeks to really kick in. Some people will feel it immediately though. We have talked in class often about the St. John's wort challenge, right? To challenge, if you're ever feeling out of sorts, to challenge yourself to just what we call catch your own tail, right? Just catch yourself, recognize where you're at, and just take St. John's wort for like 2 weeks and see what happens. See how much better you feel. I always tell people to do that before they make any major rash decision or before they do anything really radical, to just take a little course of St. John's wort. And again, it's got to be like the fresh plant tincture. Very starve, their glycerite is dried.
The glycerine is fresh if we can.
Oh, so Victoria's saying the glycerite is fresh too. It doesn't get very red though. Just because glycerin is only going to get certain things out of there. But I'll pass that around. But the glycerite is actually really delicious. So depression, all types of depression, all types of anxiety, all types of overwhelm. This also is an excellent herb for postpartum depression. Even though often that's caused by hormones, St. John's wort is really, really important. St. John's wort is a midwifery herb we use for pregnancy recovery because it has a lot of wound healing, nerve regeneration properties, right? It's also used for anxiety and insomnia. This is one of our major insomnia herbs. So this is going to be for someone who has insomnia and is also very depressed, probably very anxious. But we especially, this herb is highly specific for nightmares and night terrors and people who are violent in their sleep. Like we talked about the client I had that would have PTSD, you know, from the war that would attack his wife in his sleep, you know. Not something he would ever do in waking life.
My God.
Okay. So it's an old herb for what we call melancholy, right? The classic herb of the sun. This is also a really important herb historically for the end of life. That's why it's often used in anointing oils when people are anointed as a blessing at the end of their life. So a lot of friends that work in hospice have turned them on to like using St. John's wort as a massage oil for people in hospice, you know, giving them St. John's wort internally. It's just a really good end of life transition because partially historically, because this plant has always been associated with what religious writers would call angelic experiences. It's thought to even invoke that type of blessing. Thus, it's in the anointing oil of a lot of churches. Okay, so related to the nerves, one of the greatest uses for this herb internally and externally, this is one of the greatest nerve pain herbs of all time. One of the greatest trauma to the body whenever the nerves have been cut, severed because of surgery, because of car accidents, because of burns, because of trauma. So we're going to use this for sharp stabbing nerve pains. You know, this can be like the nerve pain of like even how carpal tunnel when the tendons and nerves get all inflamed. Good for tendonitis. Very St. John's wort's very good for bursitis, tendonitis of any joint, especially the shoulder and hips. It's very good for damage to your spine and spinal nerve damage and recovery from spinal surgeries. When people come to see us and they've had spinal surgeries, especially they had them a long time ago, they did a lot of things they would never do today, like have the cages and all this stuff. And all kinds of wiring and metal that often people oftentimes regret having immediately. That was their only option. St. John's wort is sometimes one of the only things I've found that can give some relief to those like severe chronic spinal disc and nerve pain, impingement, and spinal cord injury, spinal cord trauma. This is what we're going to do topically and internally both. This is one of the greatest massage herbs of all time. This is one of the great herbs to massage people, take a bath. Like often for kids, you can give a bath with St. John's wort for nightmares. So everything we've said so far could be used topical or internal. For the nerve pain, we put it on topical. We also take it internally. What's the only challenge of using St. John's wort?
It interacts with blood.
It interacts with a lot of medications. And it theoretically could interact with even more. The main interaction is St. John's wort interacts with antidepressants, not anti-anxiety meds, but antidepressants. Almost all types of antiviral drugs, whether it's remdesivir for COVID, or whether it's acyclovir for herpes, or whether it's AIDS. It's very known to like interact with AIDS and HIV treatments. Tamiflu for the flu, it's potentially can interact with all the same. I've never personally seen it, but it's just potentially it can. The problem with St. John's wort is not that it's like a negative interaction with these antivirals, is that it increases their absorbency like really dramatically, so much so that like their effects can be amplified. And with the antidepressants, it's not so much like it's a dangerous, there's different types of drug interactions. It's that St. John's wort affects serotonin and serotonin receptors, and so do most antidepressants. So you can get what's called serotonin syndrome, which is where you get like a bipolar swing to the extreme high. You're like super energized and you literally can't sleep, and ultra creative. I mean, a lot of people actually like it. It's not safe because it's your receptors like burning out. But a lot of people with like chronic depression often like serotonin syndrome. I don't recommend it because it's not safe. So it's not, again, like a dangerous interaction. It's just that they can amplify the effects of each other with other antidepressants. So this is a good way. St. John's wort is how we get people off of antidepressants. Yeah.
So if you're taking that, can you still use it topically?
Yeah, if you're taking antidepressants, you can do all this stuff internally. Or I mean topically,
Okay.
yeah. Topical, no problem for any of this stuff. This is just internal. If we have a little bit of St. John's wort and like a tincture or a tea, is it gonna have any interaction? It's extremely unlikely. It also interacts with blood thinners. Again, believe it or not, even though we think of St. John's wort as an antidepressant, it affects the liver. It affects this enzyme called cytochrome P450. This is where all the textbooks freak out. The medical textbooks, because cytochrome P450 is like how your liver basically processes anything whatsoever. So like in theory, because St. John's wort actually improves how this detox pathway functions, it can potentially change how all these drugs are metabolized. In theory. There's more and more research that St. John's wort, like we knew in old days, it was a major liver herb, and now we're thinking of it that way again too. It does have detoxification pathways. Okay.
Is it in any of the liver formulas, like for
It's
this?
not, I don't think it's like cleansing in the way that like dandelion and those things would be, but it is, we can use it to help people like metabolize getting off of medication. So we use St. John's wort to get people, wean people off of antidepressants.
Okay.
We also use it when people are withdrawing from like pain pills. What's the other addictive addictive street drug? Like meth and all these other abusive street drugs. We always use this to kind of help people withdraw from that process. There's one other thing it interacts with. This is a big one to know. It interacts with organ rejection drugs potentially, and that's a big one we get concerned about. So for that reason, we just don't give it to anybody that has had an organ transplant. Probably not a huge issue, but you don't want to be responsible for that, right? Okay. So any nerve pain, especially damage. This is one of our main wound healing agents. Okay. So this is internal. We're going to take it for any kind of wound, slow healing wound, cut, surgery recovery, scar of any kind, a burn of any kind, chemical burn, sunburn, radiation burn. We're going to use this internally for all of these damage and trauma to the body. But this is also our main wound wart. So a wound wart is a group of herbs that have been used topically for treating wounds of all kinds. So the only thing St. John's wort does not do topically for a wound is it doesn't stop bleeding like yarrow does, but it does everything else. It kills viruses topically. Got a little bit of antibacterial property, not a lot. But it creates wound healing, it regenerates new nerves, it regenerates new blood vessels. I mean, we can use it for varicose veins. We use it for bruising, we use it for contusions. I had a lady just the other day that had her veins stripped and had like her legs look like an eggplant, like black. And St. John's wort recommended that it'll help reabsorb all that pooled stagnant blood. So, so it's going to be one of our main wound warts. After we have a scar, once the sutures are removed, this is the main thing we're going to put on it. This is what we're going to take internally to prevent scar tissue. Okay, you ready for a gold star point? Anybody that has scar tissue in your body anywhere, this can create life suffering for people, like women that have had like fibroids removed and cut and endometrial tissue removed, and people that have had other scars and surgery scars and things cut out. We always can get the scar tissue as like this web of like connective tissue and blood vessels and nerves that can actually start having a life of its own. So people can have scar tissue pain, and it can get life debilitating from any surgery or even some trauma. This can happen too. So to help treat that or prevent it, we give St. John's wort internally, and then we also have people put it on topically after surgery to kind of prevent that or after trauma. Remember, anytime the body's been injured on the outside, we treat it, whether it's a bruise, a bug bite, whatever it is, we try to treat it. Okay. Okay. That's a lot. Does everybody understand scar tissue? You can have scar tissue almost anywhere, even dental work can cause it sometimes. A lot of people have surgery to remove scar tissue, which only creates more scar tissue. So it's like it's really complicated, and it's a lot of suffering. And doctors also tend to just like, because there's no medical emergency about it, it's just you suffer horribly. These people tend to get pushed into this high maintenance, non-compliant, overly challenging group of patients, unfortunately. People think they want drugs or something. So, okay, this is also going, is everybody okay with the scar tissue thing? That's important. I see a ton of scar tissue pain. And the best thing to do with scar tissue, I always say, is just prevent it. Just prevent it. That's why we do arnica homeopathic after surgeries, any kind, or trauma, or accidents, or broken bones, right? That's why we do St. John's wort internally and topically. We also do calendula topically on scars and injuries. We always do that. Just all you need to know is those three. Okay. We also use St. John's wort for neuropathy and nerve damage from drugs, diabetes, no matter what it is. It will help nerve pain anywhere, including in the hands and feet. Related to the nerves, this St. John's wort is one of our greatest sciatic nerve pain, lower back pain, hip pain, lumbar pain, you threw your back out kind of pain, chronic nerve pain from all those spinal lumbar stuff, sciatic nerve pain.
Would it help with pain from scoliosis?
It's also very helpful for scoliosis pain. This would all be internally and topical both. We put it right on the spine. This is one of the great spine herbs. An herb that everybody should have massaged into their spine a couple times a year. Okay. Scoliosis, we're going to mix it with black cohosh internally and topically. Black cohosh will release the tension and the musculature where the St. John's wort gets to the nerve stuff. Okay. Okay. This is also a really, really good herb for empaths and indigo children.
Mhm.
So indigo children is a name used for just super intuitive, sensitive children or people. You know, in historical society, people like that, myself, or people, you'd be trained or you'd have some kind of special life education. You wouldn't just be given a drug and told to, you know, not be so sensitive or something like in modern society. Okay, St. John's wort has a little bit of a blood moving property. For nerve, ready for a secret recipe, nerve damage. St. John's wort, half, skull cap, half. These are the two best herbs for regenerating nerve tissue. St. John's wort, also amazing for muscle soreness, muscle pain, fibromyalgia pain. Are you seeing a hint that every massage therapist should be using this tincture oil? It's amazing for massage work. So for fibromyalgia, we're going to give it topically as a liniment or an oil or a bath. And we're also going to take it internally. It's really, really good for fibromyalgia pain. It is also ready for a secret formula. Fibromyalgia, 1 part St. John's wort, 1 part wood betony, 1 part black cohosh, magic combination for fibromyalgia. So say that again, 1 part St. John's wort, 1 part skull cap, 1 part black cohosh. Amazing fibromyalgia remedy. Topically or internally, especially internally. St. John's wort, also amazing internally and topical for restless leg syndrome. Magic formula, are you ready for restless leg? I've never known this to not work, or at least help. Half skull cap, half St. John's wort. Any symptom in your body or mind that is worse with stress. St. John's wort. This means like in these complicated, people don't know what's going on, or they have, you know, like fibromyalgia and Lyme's and chronic fatigue and all these things. Just anytime they say they get worse with stress and anxiety, and they're feeling depressed, there's always good people St. John's wort.
What was the nerve damage remedy? I'm sorry.
half skull cap and half St. John's wort.
Oh, okay.
This would be internally and topically both. Just getting warmed up. Ready? One of my favorite uses of St. John's wort that never talked about much. I wish more people would share this. One of the greatest herbs for vaccine damage to brain or nerve tissue, including the shingles vaccine, especially. Like when people get shingles after getting it, this is, yeah. So we use this for shingles. But here we're talking about the vaccination side effects when it does damage to the nerves or the brain. So ideally, we do this, this is part of our vaccine protocol before, the 3 days before. This is one of the main ingredients in that formula. But we can also do it after the fact too, after people have their possible vaccine side effect. Interesting to see medicine, you know, like 10 years ago, if you said any vaccine had a side effect, you could be roasted. Just roasted. And now it's like, even a lot of conventional doctors are like, yeah, pretty much anything, you know, is possible with some of these. We see some interesting things. It's just interesting since the COVID vaccine came out of that, how that discussion's like kind of changed a little bit. Or we just say people who are worse after they get a vaccination. There's a lot of people who are just, they know they were fine and then they got a vaccination and something changed in their body. Okay, just warming up. Digestive system. So what's really cool about St. John's wort, if you ever wanted a solar plexus chakra herb, there is no herb more specific to your solar plexus chakra. You really don't need to know anything else. Because our solar plexus is about our solar, our sun side of ourselves, where we derive that confidence, radiant property from. Our solar plexus is also the part of us that goes intuitive antenna that picks up on any stress around us. That's why we always feel tension in our gut, right? So any kind of problem in the solar plexus area, we're going to do this for. We're going to use St. John's wort. This is why it's also historically used a lot for stomach aches from ulcers and stomach aches from gastritis, where your stomach is inflamed. It's a really good remedy for acid reflux caused by stress. And it's really good when people just have digestive stuff and the main symptom is like their solar plexus just hurts right below the breastbone. It just hurts. It's tight, can't breathe, there's a pain there. We also use it for when people have acid reflux and it's irritated their whole esophagus really bad and it's bleeding. For this usually we do more of the tea where you sip the tea to like heal that tissue. So acid, we call that acid reflux, like esophageal erosion. It's a technical term. Okay. Okay. Little folklore. So I said St. John's wort has been a favorite herb of many ancient healers. Paracelsus, who we're just about to cover, talked about it. Hildegard von Bingen talked about it. Knight, who we'll talk about later on, is one of his favorite healing herbs internally and topically. But the plant is historically thought that there was some kind of a solar or sun-like essence, or a lot of writers said a spiritual healing property that can be teased out of the plant through like making a tincture or tea or salve or something. So it's not only healing like physically and emotionally, it's doing this on a different level. So I always use St. John's wort when people feel like they have negativity in their life, emotionally. They're surrounded by negativity, or even like maybe like real actual spiritually negative people, or you've been in spiritually negative environments or haunted places, all kinds of things like that. You've had a negative mojo put on you, right? And remember, even an intent is a spell. So just someone hating you and thinking about you all the time can really put some bad stuff on you. It doesn't have to be, you know, a Harry Potter type sorcerer or something, right? There's just people thinking about you that are really hate you or something, or jealous or something. Okay. So it's also thought that even just being around the plant can provide a healing for people or a blessing. There's no doubt in the medicine wheel type formulation that we talked about, this is a powerful plant for the east or the spiritual direction. Like when people need spiritual uplifting, they need spiritual connection. They need spiritual guidance, people who have lost faith or lost any connection to a spiritual side of themselves. Okay. Okay, ready for another $1 million thing? This is one of our great combinations, right? Trigeminal neuralgia, TMJ. Ready? $1 million remedy. Half St. John's wort, half skullcap. Topical and internal. Okay. This is also a really good herb. The famous herbalist Maria Treben talks about this a lot, that this is like a great puberty teenage remedy. When hormones are changing for young boys or women, this is just a really good for those nerve changes, mood changes, beginning of menstrual cycle, all those things that happen to adolescents. This is like a very historical remedy. Can be a very depressive time for people too. Okay. Believe it or not, it's also a pretty decent circulation herb. And we even use it for Raynaud's, like when people's hands turn purple or white or frozen cold. Okay, not done yet, not even close. Next area, kidneys. This is a major, if you have what we call a nervous bladder, where you have to stress and anxiety and traveling and things like that make you have to pee a lot, or maybe even have incontinence with your older. This is a major remedy for incontinence, a major remedy for just nervous bladder. And it's also we've talked about this before, the most important potty training herb for children that are wetting the bed or having problems with toilet training. Whether it's the bowels or the bladder, we use this for toilet training. Because it helps children it helps the nerve sensations and helps the body respond to the nerve signals. Okay. Not done yet. We forgot to mention with muscles besides fibromyalgia, this is a major overtraining herb for athletes or weekend warriors, people doing too much pickleball, all those kinds of things, right? Because remember, overtraining is mostly not only your muscle, but like your nervous system has to like repair. I know like all the bodybuilding, all the athletes want to do like adaptogens and really energizing stuff, but really like what I've seen of athletes, And people who work out and train a lot or have like really competitive sports they're in that are really pretty hard on their body. Nervines and St. John's are probably even more important than adaptogens. But they're not as exciting. You know, most super athletes are always like, well, I don't want to take anything that's going to remotely calm me down or mellow me out. Like they want like that edge and intensity. You have to like kind of talk them through it. Like you're just going to be happier while you're training. Okay. Ready for even more? Immune system. This herb is extremely antiviral and unique because other antivirals can often have a lot of die-off. We talked about the cleansing kind of when the virus dies off. St. John's wort tends to like neutralize those reactions. So you can give it to people with chronic or acute viruses for long periods of time, and it tends to not create a healing crisis. Especially good for HPV and herpes of any kind, cold sores. There's a huge link to like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, the chronic viruses. Epstein-Barr virus, this is one of the top two. Ready for the Epstein-Barr combo, the gold combo for chronic Epstein-Barr. Half St. John's wort, half Eleuthero root. So you get the adrenal part and you get the nerve part. Okay. Its main indication is going to be, we said, for the nerves, the sharp, stabbing nerve pains. Okay. This is also really good topical on viruses, shingles. Our most important shingles remedies, herpes remedies. We use this for HPV, for women, men, shingles, outbreaks. Guess what? Chickenpox virus, one of the best remedies for them.
What does that have to do with those diseases?
It actually kills the replication cycle of the virus, so it actually prevents their growth and kind of knocks their numbers down. But it also heals like viral nerve damage. Like if herpes, it'll heal the lesion right away. Or if you catch it right away, like it won't break out. Same with like shingle and chickenpox. It's one of the it's just very relieving for the chickenpox pain. Okay. Let's see. It does have some antibacterial properties. That's why this is one of our greatest skin herbs, right? Dental, that's the one we forgot. This is one of our major dental remedies for toothache, nerve pain, nerve sensitivity. Just like Ambisol, you can just put it on your tooth and you literally will feel it get better right away. And it has to be the fresh tincture to really work well. But you can just do like you can have people drink the tea and swish it around and just kind of sip and swallow. It would be really good. It's good for canker sores and mouth ulcers and all kinds of things like that. There's a lot of newer research that it can be really good topically for skin cancer. It's kind of makes sense to me personally. We mentioned topically for burns or sunburns, right? So obviously if you have a burn or a sunburn, you're not going to probably put St. John's wort tincture on that. I mean, you can, it's going to burn like heck, it'll work, but it's not going to feel good. We'd probably use more like you would make a St. John's wort tea and soak a rag in it and put on there, or we would put a salve on it or something like that. So ready for the great sunburn remedy of all time? Yes. All right, St. John's wort oil. And then you add a little bit of lavender essential oil to it. But the St. John's wort oil is the base. Really helpful. I once saw like the worst sunburn case ever. This kid was young, you passed out on Niobrara River tubing. And just no sunscreen, baked, like his whole back was boils, like boils as big as your palm, like it was bad. Severe pain, like severe. And we did, believe it was St. John's wort oil. I think we added a little bit of vitamin E to it because the wounds were so bad. And then lavender essential oil. And it hurt to put it on, obviously, you know, but he healed up without any major, like, I mean, it healed in just a matter of a couple of days, which is like miraculous. I mean, he came in, his shirt was like this pure pus and back from all the, it was so bad. It was bad. Okay. Let's just call it good at that, maybe, right? There is a thing, if you want to get even more specific, summer solstice at noon. High noon, the peak of the sun on the day of the sun, right? St. John's wort.
Just as good for the neck, same like nerve damage.
It's really good for, yeah, upper neck nerve pain and damage, yeah. That you can put this in your house, you can grow it by your house for protection, it's just all kinds of stuff you can do with it. Let's see if I've got any other little curious points here. In a way, negativity can carry it out to the back. Yeah, this protective use is so known that the German name for St. John's wort is Hexenkraut. So basically the herb of hexes. By the way, you know, the church changed St. John's wort or St. John's Day to the 24th of June, but it's actually it's on the solstice historically. That was one of those things where, you know, when they converted different cultures, they kind of like just tweak stuff a little bit. But it's really the 21st. So two St. John's wort feasts. The other one will be on the solstice of winter. Okay. There's one other use for this that I found to be really interesting. This is a really good herb for people, men and women both, who have a lack of sensation in the pelvic area or groin or genitals. This could be from trauma. Some people just don't have a lot of sensation. There could be nerve damage. There could be, you know, lumbar nerve stuff. It's also good for people who have pelvic pains and like pains in the genital areas, pains in the groin. Anytime the nerves of like that lower part of the body are involved, it's really helpful for them. I've also used this, I should publish this someday because it was so miraculous. I've also used this for Peyronie's disease. Don't see this really much. I need to publish this someday. Can somebody spell that? It's not spelled like that. It's something like that.
P-E-Y-R-O-N-I-E.
Okay, P-E-Y-R-O-N-I-E. Peyronie's disease. This is like where men can have like just through genetics, the extreme curvature of the penis, and it can cause like severe pain, and they often get surgeries, and by the way, the surgeries usually really make things worse. They'll put like, plastic, almost like a splint on one side to like straighten it out. Then they have other pain, and then all the men that I've ever seen that have had that have scar tissue then pains that happen, and they just, yeah. But it can be really helpful for the pain of that. Like I've actually seen it completely just 100% stop the pain. And you put it on topical, the oil, and you take it internal. That you won't see in any textbook. And this is its spiritual insight, I would say. So St. John's wort is really specific for deep, vague, primordial fears that relate to powerful life experiences, desperation, or existential suffering. So you're being tested to the max, right? This is your friend. So primordial, formless fear that cannot be put into words by most people. So those parts of like our shadow sides of ourselves that when we touch them, it's not very comfortable. Emotionally and usually physically. It's also really good for people who have major control issues. So super controlling people who would probably never take it anyway. Somewhat serious though,
Can you take this with pain meds? Like if
Yeah, you can take this with pain meds. We just have to be aware of just not mixing it with antidepressants or anything.
Right.
So, yeah. It's a really good concussion herb too.
like with what Bethany?
Mhm. Hemorrhoids, headaches. Yeah, quite a bit of stuff. So that would be kind of like a general synopsis of St. John's wort. I prefer to only use it as a fresh plant tincture, or Gaia Herbs makes that fresh plant derived capsule. Those are the only two ways I really like to do it. I mean, that being said, the tea and capsules, they'll work. You just have to realize it's just not going to have like all that full vitality and potential. A lot of those really mood uplifting compounds are not as concentrated. Yeah, questions on St. John's wort and Zoom land?
What about heart meds? Does it interact with?
Yeah, it does not interact with heart meds. Except we just don't give it blood thinners because of the potential interaction. Mhm.
And does it strengthen the pelvic floor?
Does it what?
Is it used for pelvic floor issues?
Yeah, all pelvic floor issues can be helped by St. John's wort. Anytime we have a pain in the pelvic floor, even if we don't know why, this could be the prostate, just the pelvic floor itself. Like we said, groin pains, vaginal pains. We use this for like vestibulitis, like all these like vaginal pain disorders that can be also debilitating for women. We use this if someone's getting pelvic floor therapy. This is like an herb we use with it to help out. Which is finally pelvic floor therapy is getting a lot of good attention finally. It's really exciting. Yeah. Question, any other
And
questions?
it's gonna be safe for pets?
We have to ask Jen about pets. I don't know for sure. I don't know anything about pets, but we can ask Jen. She would know that.
And prostate issues.
Prostate, yeah, pretty good for prostate, like severe pains. It's not good for just like general prostate inflammation. But when we get to, a lot of men can just get chronic prostate pains that just get really unknown of what's going on.
Prostate surgery.
Prostate surgery recovery,
Radiation.
yeah, or radiation from prostate cancer treatment or something.
And that's where the scar tissue comes in, because
Yeah.
I know lots of
Yeah,
men that have had that surgery and they yearly or every couple of years, they have to have the doctor go in and remove the scar
Yeah.
tissue, which is extremely painful.
yeah. So St. John's Wort, you know, I mean, a lot of, I guess most people would be willing to do this, but for like the prostate stuff, we would do St. John's Wort internally, and then we would also like massage it into like the groin and pelvis and like above the prostate. But then also making a suppository of St. John's Wort is really helpful for that too.
Mhm.
I mean, you could technically do an enema, would probably be helpful, but suppository is like more gentle. Good.
And depression after you've had your ovary or.
It's very good for depression from even hormonal changes, but we would still probably combine it with other hormonal herbs. But yeah, hysterectomy,
Yes.
mood swings and hormone changes, which are dramatic, right? Very helpful for, and just the recovery of the surgery. Okay. Okay,
Cheers.
we're doing good. Okay, that is St. John's Wort. I think we're gonna put that one on YouTube. That'd be a good public one. Okay, closing on St. John's Wort. Any other questions? No? Okay, when you make the